It's 2016 in the far northeast of Scotland, and a team of archaeologists are excavating a number of sea caves along the coast of the Black Isle, just north of the popular tourist village of Rosemarkie. They're looking for clues that would give them an insight into the inhabitants of the caves from the past, completely unaware that they're about to stumble upon the victim of a brutal murder. In Cave 2B, archaeology enthusiast James McComas begins digging a small corner at the entrance of the cave. Of all the places in Scotland and the Black Isle, he's about to dig the very spot used to bury the body of a muscular Pictish man. In this podcast, I meet up with James McComas and Bob and Rosemary Jones to find out more. So James, we're podcasting from a cave today. Give us a little bit about your background and what brought us here today.
Well, I've been interested in archaeology for about the last 10, 12 years. And round about 10 years ago, I got involved in the Rosemarkie Caves project, which was started by Simon Gunn. And then back in 2016, we started doing some full-scale excavations here, which I got involved with. And I love digging, so I'm still involved in the Rosemarkie Caves project, and I'm also chair of the North of Scotland Archaeological Society.
And Bob and Rosemary?
The two of us did a little bit of archaeology a long time ago, in the 1970s, and then did absolutely nothing. And then I was just coming up to retiring, and we both we're cavers. And Simon, who was the inspiration for this project, got in touch with us because we were cavers. And we came along to his first dig along the road. And lo and behold, we got involved in this project, which has gone on. And we've excavated more and more and found more and more, a lot of it unexpectedly. Yeah. So it's kept us out the pub. Well, partly.
Rosemary, you're laughing. How many times have you had to walk along here?
I'm not even going to try and estimate it. We started off at Cairds Cave in 2010, and you parked in Rosemarkie and walked that far. And then we have done test pits and looked in most of the 19 caves between Rosemarkie and Cromarty.
Just give us an idea of the distance. How spaced out are the caves?
They tend to occur in groups. This cave, Lerney 2B, is in a ridge, a buttress, and there are three caves this size, two of which are tiny and then the big one. And the other side of the same buttress, there are two, three. Okay. And then as you go along, you come across almost groups of them. Yeah.
So we're in this cave where the Rosemarkie man was found. Can you give me a background into the fascinating story of the Rosemarkie man? Okay,
well, it was all very unexpected, really. We were doing our first proper season of digging at the Rosemarkie Caves. This was back in 2016. And we'd done 2 weeks of digging here already with a good small team, including the three of us. And this was the last day of the dig. This was meant to be the last day of the dig. We got right down deep into the cave, almost into what we call the natural, where there's no kind of man-influenced stuff. So obviously in archaeology, the deeper you go, the older you get. So we think we got everything out of here. We'd already discovered some metalworking, evidence very low down in the cave, which we thought was possibly Pictish. So we were very excited about that. We thought already this is well over 1,000 years ago, Pictish metalworking in a cave. This is different. People are going to be excited about this. So we were already very happy. And then on this final day, I was actually sent into the corner of the cave over there just to finish off, really. It looked like it was clean sand. There was nothing more in it, but we just wanted to investigate it and just make sure there was nothing else in there. So I was digging down in this sand, with my trowel, thinking I'm not going to find anything here. And a few, what I thought were animal bones started to come up. Well, there were some animal bones, there were some butchered animal bones, but also amongst them I got some very small little bones which I thought looked almost like fingers and toes. But at the time we weren't expecting to find anything like that, and I told the other people in the cave, and we just thought, oh, it's probably animal, let's keep going, but keep an eye on it, but then go a little bit deeper and these two knees appeared, basically. These two knees sticking up out of the floor in nice clean sand with a big boulder in between them. And I think there were probably half a dozen of us here at the time. It was quite a small team, as I say, last day, not meant to find anything else. And at that point we thought, okay, this is human. This has got to be human. This is not a deer. This is not anything else. We have a body here. So we didn't know how old it was. We didn't know anything about it, but obviously this was a game changer. So at that point, I thought I was going to be dragged off, because I should say I'm not a professional archaeologist. I'm a very enthusiastic amateur, and we did have two professionals here at the time in front of the dig, and I thought they were going to say, oh, thanks very much, James, you go over and go away in the corner and play where you can't do any harm, and we'll handle the big stuff. But they let me carry on, so I worked throughout that day and basically uncovered this whole skeleton lying there, tucked away in the corner of the cave, and complete. He appeared to be, I didn't know it was a he for certain then, but we thought he might be a he. He looked, complete. The only thing left by the end of the day was there was a whole patch of animal bone above where the skull should be. So the skull was like the lowest point down, and there was a whole kind of patch of butchered animal bone above him, and we assumed obviously the skull was underneath. But that all needed to be drawn and recorded properly and not just taken away quickly. So that's where we got to at night, and yeah, it was all very exciting.
This animal bone, was that linked to the?
Yeah,
to the...
There were actually two patches of animal bone. There was one on his arm and one above his skull. Later, we got those radiocarbon dated, and they came back as exactly the same period as the skeleton. So we already thought from where they were so close, it's got to be related. But the radiocarbon dates confirmed it. The story seems to be there was some kind of perhaps feasting event that happened after he was laid in the ground, and these were deposited on top of him.
You think that was part of a ritual burial that they...
Well, you said the R word, not me.
Okay. So, I mean, when you find this guy...
Hang on.
Oh, sorry,
the police have to get involved.
Yes, yeah.
Tell me more about that, Rosemary.
I wasn't here, I can't.
Okay, Bob.
Well, I wasn't here on the day of the find, but I got a phone call from our professional archaeologist in the evening. He says, you'll have to come over and have a look. And when I arrived next day, there was a police car at the top of the cliff. And by the time I got down here, there were two uniformed policemen and one CID man. And one enthusiastic policeman is wanting to put scene of crime tape around everything.
We got photos of this.
But we eventually managed to convince the CID officer that it was actually underneath medieval layers, so it's probably okay. But we weren't allowed to proceed until we got permission from Procurator Fiscal. So it's reported up to the Procurator Fiscal, who got in touch with Crown Office superiors, who got in touch with Sue Black, who's our forensic anthropologist, not our forensic anthropologist, a very well-known forensic anthropologist, and she managed to convince them and our archaeologist convinced them it was okay, and we proceeded from there.
It must have caused quite a stir with the locals if they come walking along here and seen CID and police tape.
I don't think anyone saw, fortunately. I think we were quite fortunate on that. They were only here, I think, for a few hours, and then they were away again. And this is, you don't get a lot of people passing here. So fortunately, it didn't make the papers or anything at that point.
Well, just at this moment, when you have something like that, a discovery that's quite precious, really, you don't really want the public poking in about it.
We had a complete embargo on it in terms of publicity. We didn't tell anyone. There was the core committee of the Rosemarkie Caves group. We knew about it, and we agreed between us we weren't even going to tell our friends or other people in the group or anything else.
That must have been hard.
We actually kept it a secret, as it were, for 6 months, with only half a dozen people here knowing about it, because we did not want to go off into the press and give half a story. So we actually did a reveal. We eventually had a meeting in Cromarty, where Sue Black, the anthropologist, came along, and to a fairly packed hall in Cromarty said, this is what they found. And there was an audible gasp went round the room.
That's right. And at that point, the press releases went out simultaneously and it hit the papers and everything else.
We know that he had a pretty sinister demise, this guy. But before we get to that, I want to ask you, after the discovery and announcing it all, what had you established about his identity, his social status, and the circumstances that led to the shallow grave?
Well, once the animal bone on top of the skull was removed, we could see there was something obviously quite wrong with the skull. You know, it had massive fractures in it, which I thought was later damage at first. I thought, oh, what a shame, the rest of him's perfect. But then, after careful consideration, we realised these were probably injuries that happened to him in life. And this is probably how he ended up here. So he'd been murdered, basically. Yeah. Anyway, so Bob's mentioned Sue Black, the forensic anthropologist who got wind of this through the Procurator Fiscal, basically. We were very fortunate that this lady, who's now a dame and very eminent, got really excited by this. She saw the pictures and everything else and thought, wow, this is a really good story. He had 5 separate cranial injuries and a complete example of overkill. And she wanted to kind of tell the story of it, and she commissioned a reconstruction of his face to be done. So that was a big bit of luck for us. We didn't have to pay for that. That was her coming forward, and Dundee, where she worked at the time, volunteering to do that.
Tell me about these injuries to his face. What did she discover?
There were 2 blows to the head at jaw level, one of which didn't just break the jaw, he swallowed a tooth. And in fact, James found the tooth when he was excavating in the chest cavity.
We actually found a tooth down here. And the first injury he received, I think, was in the jaw and had knocked out a tooth. And the tooth we recovered from down here had not just kind of floated down there after death. He had actually inhaled it. Then there was a
second blow to the other side of the jaw.
So we think it went right through the mouth.
Okay.
Yeah,
from side to side.
Like a spear or a sword?
No, that's later. No, that's later.
How is it?
Because he then falls backwards,
I thought that was
and he got a bang on the back of his head. And then when he was on the ground, just to make sure that he's dead, they put the square hole through. It must be some sort of metal implement that went through from one side to the other through his head. And there was no metal found with him, so they must have taken it away.
Yeah.
But the remarkable thing about it was there's a series of very violent blows to the head, which undoubtedly kill him. But the rest of his body, there are no signs of defence injuries.
Like putting his hands up to protect himself.
All his are intact. So whether it's an execution that he's held, whatever.
He wasn't aware it was going to happen, you think?
Well, maybe not. And then he's buried in this very strange fashion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got the actual thing if you want the injuries.
Yeah, tell me the injuries.
Yeah, so the first one was a penetrating trauma to the right side of the mouth where his teeth were broken, and this is where he inhaled this tooth fragment, which was found down here in the skeleton. The next was a blow to the other side of the jaw, the left side of the jaw, cracking the mandible with great force. This may have been made with the same implement. The thinking is this was some kind of pole, fighting pole kind of implement, a long wooden pole perhaps. After that, there were contact fractures on the back of the skull, which was probably from a contre-coup. So that means he fell back and hit his head against something hard. If this happened in the cave, presumably it was the cave wall. After that, yeah, you're right, we did get this the wrong way around. Whilst on the ground, an implement, possibly the same one as before, was driven right through his head from the left side to the right in the temple region. So that would have certainly killed him. If he wasn't already dead at that point, he was dead then, right? You don't survive getting a pole right through your head. But after that, then a different implement was used. So above him, a different implement with a more square profile was forced through the top of his skull with great force to kind of like finish him off. So they already knew he was dead before that, but they kind of did over.
Okay, so he was well dead, and they really ensured that. Then when they've placed him in the grave, how was he placed? What happened?
So if you look at the entrance to the cave, he's tucked out of the way. He's in a corner you can't see from the outside. He's somewhere kind of secret, if you like. He's tucked away in a dark corner, and he's kind of pushed up against the wall and laid out with his head back and his knees sticking up in a supine posture, and he's kind of tucked into this natural alcove. So they're obviously not wanting him put on display. They're wanting him tucked away. It was kind of purpose made for it. So
and did they put like ground or sand or anything on top of him?
We're not, well, possibly they dug in the sand and planted him in the sand. Yeah, and we're not 100% sure. We don't know what the levels in the cave were like in that side, but perhaps they dug a shallow grave in the sand and just placed him in the sand, and then placed him backed up in this position. So whatever the story of how he died, you know, whether that was just a group of people or one person, probably more likely a group of people just attacked him because they didn't like him for whatever reason, or whether he was potentially a willing sacrifice, which is another possibility. He was obviously placed there with great care. You know, he wasn't just slung out, he wasn't just stuck on a pile, he wasn't just slung randomly into a pit. You know, he was placed in this position with great care. A big boulder was placed between his knees, presumably to kind of weigh him down after death. The theory is, you know, maybe that was a way of, you know, his spirit couldn't walk after death, you know, a way of keeping him down. There's no other obvious reason for it to be there. And also then we've got these animal bones placed on top of the body. We've dated to pretty much the time of death. We think more than likely they represent some kind of offering or feast event when he was placed in the ground. So we think there is some ritual involved there, at the very least with the placing of the body, if not with his actual death.
Do you think that he had a link to this cave? Is there any evidence of a link to being in this cave? Would that be a reason he was placed here? Was there maybe raiders or people who had come and killed him and family buried him here? Or is there any way you could know that at all? Or
all this stuff is up for debate. And if you see the recent TV programme that's been on Sky History, they come up with some conclusions based on that, possible inter-clan or chieftain wars and raiding across the sea, and there's all kinds of different theories in there. It's all possible. One of our theories is the cave is kind of like a liminal space. They would have, it's an in-between place, it's between this world and the next. It's kind of somewhere special they've put him, you know, it's kind of towards the next world, it's not in our normal working life, you know.
Were these caves valued as a shelter? I mean, were they in limited supply, if you know what I mean? Would it been, this is a great location to live in?
We honestly don't know. I mean, we don't have... The only evidence we have at the moment is from around about 100 years later, and they were definitely doing ironworking in here, and the other caves in this group.
The area that the body was in was actually under a beautiful cobbled floor, sea-washed pebbles, and it was really quite good.
That was quite high up, though. I think the theory was that was like a lot later.
So a later group of people have come and used the cave for their purpose.
Absolutely, and
floor.
we know the cave was used at periods thereafter, right through almost the present day.
But when they put their floor in, they've not stumbled upon that skeleton.
There's a lot. So this skeleton was a lot lower than the other stuff we found. So the cobbles that Rosemary's talking about we were digging in them probably a week or 10 days before we got down to the skeleton. So we moved a lot of stuff to get from there down to him.
Caves are good places to do metalworking, particularly if you're doing smithing. An important point in smithing is being able to see the colour of the metal as you heat it up, anneal it, hammer it. And you're looking for different subtle colour changes from yellow to orange to red. So they're good places. And initially we did think, because of course until we got our dating results back, we didn't know the relationship between the metalworking and our man. And initially we thought perhaps he was the blacksmith, because he certainly had the build for that sort of thing. But we've no direct evidence of him being the blacksmith. And eventually it turns out the blacksmithing is a different time period. It's a good 100 years later.
Just slightly later. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned his build there. What was his build?
He was a strong lad, I think our anthropologist said. Yeah. Strong, handsome lad, even.
Well, we can show a picture of that, and he was a handsome dude.
And he certainly had good upper arm strength, which would be consistent with something like blacksmithing.
I think from the muscle attachments to the bone, they could tell he was obviously quite well built.
I mean, based on that, what you know of that time period with the Picts and any other skeletons that have been found, is there any evidence that they were actually physically just strong people? Because they must have lived in kind of a pretty harsh environment.
Yeah, I mean, I guess anyone before around 150 years ago, I bet on average probably was stronger, just because, they didn't have cars, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have central heating, they had to go out and do hard manual labour, most of them.
What would his lifestyle have been like in this area? For how would he gather food? What would they eat?
This is completely, this is complete guesswork, basically. We do have some isotope analysis. So later on, after the press release went out and the talk, we got some isotope analysis, which is a way of which they can look at signatures in the teeth to find out what someone ate during their life and also where they grew up. Okay, so we did then find out he'd had quite a rich diet, really. He had quite a high nitrogen diet, perhaps higher than we would have expected. And that included fresh fish, not sea fish, but fresh fish, and also possibly suckling pig or something like that. That signature, if you like, has since been compared to other burials from the same kind of period, and it still looks quite high up in there in terms of nutrition and nitrogen content. One of the possible conclusions from that is he may have been of high status. So he may have been a chieftain. He may have been someone quite important.
I think you said something there. I actually find that amazing. You said fresh fish. We're right on the coast here. And I know there isn't really many rivers that would be big enough to supply you fresh fish all the time. Where's that coming from, do you think?
I think probably relatively local. Interestingly, the same thing's found at Port Mahomet. So there's remains of a Pictish monastery, and then subsequent church were found up at Port Mahomet with all kinds of craft working and silver working and Pictish stone manufacture and all kinds of stuff happening up there. And we know also from the isotope results from those skeletons, they weren't eating sea fish. They were eating fresh fish. We do not know why. Maybe it was it was seen as lower status. Maybe it was seen that's what the common people eat.
I suppose the only way would be if you found a number of skeletons and they were deemed to be common people and you could compare.
Which takes us back to another point about Rosemarkie man. You were asking earlier on, were the Pictish people generally big, strong, healthy people? We have very little evidence from a very point of view that we have very few intact skeletons or skeleton remains. We're very lucky here that our man was buried in sand, and that's preserved his remains. They look as though he only died a decade ago. So there are very, very few Pictish human remains that are available to examine and get that sort of evidence from.
What a lucky find.
No, it's amazing. I mean, I did do some research after the find with other academics. I asked other academics about the best preserved Pictish skeletons they knew of. And the nearest, there was some at Port Mahomet and another at a Pictish barrow cemetery called London Links, which are quite well preserved, but not as good as ours. Okay, so as far as I know, we have the best preserved Pictish skeleton in Scotland.
Well, that's great, and this kind of leads me on to the next thing, right? You've got this amazing skeleton. You've then got the opportunity to do all kinds of analysis, like DNA analysis, radiocarbon dating, and you can learn a lot more. What did you learn about his lifestyle? You're
going to struggle with an answer for that because we have nothing.
Yeah.
The Picts left nothing. There's no written manuscripts.
No.
They've left stones and we don't know how to read them.
Picts are still often called the mysterious Picts just because they've left so little behind. We have big carved stones. We have some barrow cemeteries, some cemeteries where they were buried. We have a very few kind of more domestic buildings, but very few compared to other periods, and that's pretty much it.
Is there any clues to religious practices?
The Picts did become Christianized, so we know later on the Picts did adopt Christianity. We know this because they founded monasteries. There was a monastery here at Rosemarkie, possibly a little bit after the period our man died, but possibly just starting around that time. We can't be 100% certain, therefore, whether he could have been Christian. One of our early theories was he could have been a monk from across the sea bringing Christianity, possibly from Ireland. But the isotope analysis told us that he very likely grew up round here, so we think he's a local.
It sounds like he didn't have the physical build of a monk. Anyway, I can't imagine they were.
He was a well-built guy, but as I say, I mean, whether you were a common labourer, a farmer or whatever, or whether you were a kind of much more rich dude who was out hunting and fighting and, practicing for battle, you were probably likely to be pretty fit compared to the average person now, I would imagine, Yeah.
What do we know about their culture? Is there anything you definitely know about Pictish culture? The way that they lived, or how did they live in? What kind of house did they live in? Did they live in a house?
Yeah,
we
know they lived in houses. They lived in kind of rectilinear houses. They were kind of oval or rectangular. There have been some found, particularly in Glenshee and in a few other locations, but very few have been securely dated to that period. So they did live in houses with stone base walls, probably turf walls, thatched roofs. We know that, but there is at the moment very little evidence for that. There's just a handful of sites have been found where there's Pictish buildings, as opposed to other periods further back in time where we have loads of evidence. Bronze Age, Iron Age roundhouses are everywhere. You know, they're all over the countryside. We were just at a conference this weekend where just about every talk was about roundhouses. But Pictish buildings, you know, there's, as I say, there's like a few sites anyone knows about.
Did they construct using mud at all, or just was it just stone?
I think more than likely probably stone based and then turf, and maybe some and also timbers, particularly where the timber was available.
And what happened to them, the Picts? Where did they go?
They probably didn't go anywhere. You know, people do have the image that they disappeared and got wiped out. They would simply have been assimilated into the population. They're still around, if you like. They didn't go away. They didn't die out.
Is that something that can be traced, like using DNA or?
Possibly. Well, this is I mean, if you go on social media, there is this thing about the Pictish gene, and but I don't claim to be an expert about it. It all sounds a little bit.
Elaborate on that. What is that?
So there's apparently a DNA marker, which, if you have it, is meant to relate to a being Pictish, of Pictish heritage. I think that's very much debated. I don't think any serious academic would support that necessarily, but I remember reading about it.
What sort of modern technology do you use? Is there anything that has brought archaeology forward that's made your job easier? Do you scan the ground with anything, or just dig?
Yeah, there have been enormous changes in the last 20 years or so. To start off with, the traditional thing everybody's heard of, radiocarbon dating, that's become much more precise in the last few years. We've also had things like isotope analysis, which will tell us things about diet. There's a whole host of scientific applications, and one of them, the main drivers that's there, is in this day and age, is the prices have come down. So that's made it much more available. I mean, we're a small organisation, so paying for things like radiocarbon dates is a real problem and a real cost to us. So the cheaper they are, the better for us. The current cost, I think, for a radiocarbon date is about £300.
315.62 plus VAT.
Plus VAT, okay, of course. I guess these aren't VAT registered either.
Yeah, and the other thing that's happened with radiocarbon dating is you used to need a lot of material to do the testing. So if you had a precious piece of bone, you would have to almost have to destroy it to do the testing. And nowadays the quantities are far smaller. You were asking about other techniques, and there are techniques for looking in the ground. You can carry out a resistivity survey, which looks at the resistance between 2 points on the ground, and in simple terms, it will tell you if the ground is damper or drier underground. If it's damper, it'll be a ditch. If it's drier, it'll be a wall. So you can maybe get an idea of where to dig. There are other techniques like magnetometry, which I know not quite so much, but all of these things do make life easier, particularly if you're not so much in the cave, where we've a restricted area and we basically took it all out. But if you're in open ground, you can find likely places to do an excavation.
Mm-hmm. Along these caves where you've been excavating, have you been able to employ any of these techniques?
Not really. Yeah. Well, the post-ex ones, the ones after excavation, certainly we've done radiocarbon dates at a number of caves. And the ones where we've done the major excavations, we've also done some isotope analysis. There was some DNA analysis from Rosemarkie Man, and we've also had various experts look at other particular finds like animal bones and fish bones and ceramics and kind of evaluate them. Actually as well, me and Bob have also did quite a lot of photography here. Quite a big part really of the story was us doing quite a lot of photography in very dark conditions in here after the find. And then I actually did some photogrammetry from those. It didn't come out fantastically well, but well enough. I managed to build a 3D model of the skeleton. So that was pretty good as well. So that's another bit of new tech. So actually, you can imagine if you're trying to record somewhere where you've excavated, if you can make a 3D model of it instead of just relying on a drawing and maybe a blurry photograph, that's a big step forward.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
So just speaking of all these excavations up and down here, you've got Rosemarkie, man. That's a fascinating find, but there's a lot more, right? There's a lot more to be found here. What else have the caves revealed?
Well, we mentioned ironworking earlier on, and there was certainly ironworking in this cave. And there's another cave the other side of the buttress, which also had ironworking. We found a smelting hearth in there.
There was a hearth.
What's this? When's this dated to?
Around 700 AD.
Okay.
So a long time ago, well, in the Pictish period, just slightly after probably our man died.
700 AD. Where, in that time, where do the Picts fit in with the rest of Scotland? Because I just want to get a picture for the audience. Like,
well, these things move all the time, as academics argue, and things move on. But basically, the Pictish period is thought to be basically from the end of the Roman period, so from round about 300, 400 AD. I know the Romans weren't up here, although that's debated too, but that's kind of where it's dated from. Running through to around about 850, 900 AD. Basically, you were asking before about what happened to the Picts. So we think the Picts didn't go anywhere. What changed was the Pictish language died out. And I think there's two kind of things happening. We had the Gaels coming in from the west, okay, who from Northern Ireland and had a foothold in Argyll, and they gradually came in and took over. And at one point, the line of Pictish kings kind of merged with I can't remember exactly how it happened, but they intermarried anyway. Basically, the Gael royalty and Pictish royalty intermarried, and eventually the Gaelic language, which is still around today, took prominence. So the Pictish language, which was probably more similar to Welsh, although no one knows for certain any longer, is kind of lost. The other thing as well is you also got the Vikings coming in that period. So the end of the Pictish period, you've also got Viking incursions and then taking over vast parts of the north basically. And
where do going south of here, then you also have the Britons and the Romans. Where do they all fit into that then? Where are they? And why are they not up here?
God, these are huge questions. Well, the Romans, I'm not a Roman scholar. I think probably the simple answer to why the Romans are not up here is because it was just too difficult for them. It's just too far away and too hostile, and the terrain was too difficult, and it just wasn't a good return on their investment, basically, to be all the way up.
The Romans initially were in Angus, and they did. We think they reached Elgin, which is just the other side of the Firth from here, as a series of marching camps, as really just a military expedition. But they then retreat. They built Hadrian's Wall, and that's their boundary. Sometime later, they build the Antonine Wall, which goes from the Forth to the Clyde through Falkirk. And they're only there for 20 years, and then they retreat. And it's maybe going to Wales and Cornwall was valuable to them because they got
flatter land, good farming land.
They got gold and tin and zinc, and they maybe didn't see quite the resources in Scotland, and maybe Scotland was a wee bit more of a hostile place for them. So it was the boundary of their empire.
Yeah. So they basically, they probably tried. They definitely came for a look round. They definitely had contact with local tribes. We know that because we found caches of Roman coins.
So they could have possibly been trading?
Possibly. There was a cache of Roman coins found at Belladrum, where the festival is now. And the theory is with those is they were kind of a buy-off for the local chieftains, for the local chieftain to keep the tribes sweet, basically. So you don't come and invade past the Antonine Wall or whatever. We'll buy you off with this, with all these coins. That's a theory. One theory as to how the Picts came together as a kingdom, if you like, rather than a load of different tribes, and this is an archaeologist called Fraser Hunter came up with this theory, basically, is that the Romans being there as a big force, threatening them on the border, made all these smaller tribes unite together, club together to say, right, we're going to keep them out. Well, this is the big enemy. We're not going to fight between ourselves. We're going to club together and make sure these Romans don't get in. And that's one theory as to how the kind of Picts came together as a kingdom in the first place.
I mean, you spoke of their diet as there was possibly fresh fish, beef, cattle bones that you found.
Certainly, yeah.
I'm guessing that they were farming these animals to some extent. And are they animals that would have been in this area as a type of cow that would have been here? Or could they have traded that with the Romans or...
Well, I mean, just to clarify, Rosemarkie man is a long time after the Romans. So by the time he comes along, the Romans are long gone. And really, it's still debated, but generally the Pict period proper doesn't really start until the Romans have left Britain. But I mean, it's all kind of debated. More than likely, I would have thought these were local animals. But I don't know. I'm not an animal expert. Was there anything in the analysis to suggest that?
There was a suggestion that his diet was not the same as you would expect from the locals.
Okay.
But I don't know where or who said that, but it was one of the experts.
It was just because of the high status thing, I think. There was a very spurious headline that came out saying Rosemarkie man may have been Pictish royalty, which is like an extreme exaggeration, because from the isotope analysis, one interpretation was perhaps he was a bit higher status. Maybe he was a chief, maybe he was a gaffer, not necessarily a king. Yeah. But and the papers made, it's Pictish royalty.
That's a great conclusion to jump to.
The centre, or I think the centre of the Pictish area for Triu is now thought to be Burghead Way, where there's been a lot of excavations done over the last few years.
Yeah, Burkhead's certainly very important. They think there was a big kind of naval presence there, and there was certainly a big fort there at Burkhead.
Pictish naval.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Also over in Aberdeenshire at Rhynie, it's thought there was a possibly royal centre there, they found lots of posh metalworking, jewellery making, production of precious items going on, and obviously a big imprint in the ground of significant buildings. So I should have mentioned that. Actually, that is more that's something else we do know about, but that's very unusual. That's not where the common people were living, obviously. Taradale, which is we keep mentioning, we did excavate a big Pictish barrow cemetery there. As I say, one of the main things we know about the Picts is from these cemeteries they left behind. So basically they're like these big mounds, square and round ones with bodies underneath. We excavated a big one there at Taradale a few years ago. From the size of these things, we think there were some pretty important people there as well. And I think there's someone who did a PhD who reckoned that might also have been a royal centre. It's very rich farming land, it would make sense. Or an important centre at least. But certainly they were in the north anyway. They were probably all around this area, Moray, Highlands, Inverness.
One thing that we didn't mention when we were discussing Rosemarkie Man and where he was buried is we've got the complete skeleton with all the bones intact and no obvious defence injuries, and just the head, the subject, a very serious damage. But we found absolutely nothing else in there. So
No clothes.
So you want no? There's not a trace of anything. He's not been buried with any grave goods. There's no trace of clothing, and given the state of preservation of him, maybe we should have had. If there were things there, they may well have been preserved. So we draw the conclusions. Is he stripped naked and buried?
It seems such an unusual. It almost seems like a ritual burial, the way he was placed and the animal bones, but at the same time they've left him with none of his possessions, which you often see in other parts of the world where they would maybe put gold coins on your eyes or like the Egyptians.
Dame Professor Sue Black at her big talk at Cromarty, when she revealed the whole thing, did say that on some of the excavations that she's been involved in, you can identify people from things in their pockets. And she said, but Rosemarkie man didn't have pockets. It didn't even have the clothes. So,
well, he could have been wearing like a shift or something, which has rotted away. That's possible, but certainly if he was wearing, he didn't leave behind any obvious leather or metal or anything like that. So he was either naked or scantily dressed.
It's such a mystery, because if the monastery was along in Rosemarkie, it's quite a walk with a body to take someone along here, and then to be buried naked, no clothes.
This could have been pre-Christian. Yeah. But so yes, my thinking, at least, I won't speak for everyone, is there is at least a ritual element to the burial. However he was killed, and for whatever reason, there was something ritual about him being placed in this cave, in possibly this kind of place seen as being in the other world, or halfway between this world and the next, and the animal bone, the big stone, the way he's tucked up in the corner, all the rest.
The big stone, to me, I'm completely just forming my own opinion here, but the big stone to me seems like they want to weigh him down in case he gets up.
Exactly.
But his soul, or maybe they want to weigh his soul down, what do you know about sacrifice with the Picts? Were they known to do anything like that, or that type of ritual?
We don't really know. We know very little. One of the links we did think was, so a little bit further back in time, a few hundred years earlier, in the Iron Age, there have been these bog bodies found. So one of our theories is this a similar kind of death which has been carried over, which has still been kind of practiced in a slightly different form here. So what the latest theory with those seems to be is these are people who have been found preserved in peat bogs, and they were deliberately placed there kind of in shallow water, and because of that they've been fantastically preserved. Okay, along with the skin and clothes and the contents of the stomach and all the rest of it. These people appear to all have been of high status. When they've analysed the bodies, they've been found to be like really well manicured and cared for, really well fed, wearing, and seemingly, possibly, special status. Again, I think on none of these have any defensive injuries been found, but they've all had these kind of overkill deaths where they've been like double or triple deaths. They've not just been stabbed, they've been strangled as well. They've not just had their, whatever. There's been kind of overkill. A theory behind it, and of course this is completely unprovable, is that these were people who were either volunteered or willing sacrifices at times of bad harvests or things going wrong in general, to kind of propitiate the gods, to kind of keep the gods happy, and to say, all right, obviously we've displeased the heavens, our crops have failed, so we're going to make this sacrifice to you.
Was it known that they worshipped a deity?
Pre-Christian, we don't know. We imagine probably they did. pretty much everyone in history we know about has worshipped some kind of deity or multiple deities more often. So, but
what about the symbolisms that they left? You know, they carved stones, and did they leave any clue on anything like that?
Well, they will tell you a few things. They'll tell you that they went hunting, because we've got pictures of horse riders and hunting with dogs and this sort of thing. But I mean, the thing about the Pictish era, we have no written records. We then do have on all these various mysterious symbols of Z-rods and half moons and mirrors, but we don't really have much at all that says nothing in the way of writing, really, it's all supposition at that point. We maybe have the occasional little bit of other people outside writing about the Picts, but whether they give a truthful view or not is another matter.
How much do you collaborate with other fields, and how do they contribute to forming a picture of what you found? So we're talking like Sue Black, like universities, other groups.
Yeah, I mean, and as I say, we were very fortunate with Sue Black. She is a forensic anthropologist. I think she normally researches more modern crimes. You know, I actually read one of her books recently where she talks about visiting, war zones and Bosnia and all these kind of places, and investigating mass graves and recovering murdered skeletons and all that kind. So it was, as I say, it was happenstance through us reporting this to the police and the Procurator Fiscal that she got involved and got very interested in it as essentially a cold case.
She must have really enjoyed investigating this.
Actually, in there, I've got some correspondence from her, and she was very excited, very interested, because of the multiple injuries. And the mysterious nature of it, why he's ended up in this cave, and her being involved and then getting the facial reconstruction done for free was a major thing as far as we were concerned. So we were very fortunate there.
It was really fascinating and it's great to see, because it can give you a real picture, then something tangible that you can actually see. This is roughly what the guy looks like. I want to ask you, have you seen the facial reconstruction of Bonnie Prince Charlie recently?
Yes.
He wasn't so bonny.
No, absolutely not.
They put a few spots on him as well, just for good measure.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
I wonder how he got the name Bonnie Prince Charlie.
I don't know.
He was ugly.
Because he had followers.
Well,
maybe he gave himself as a...
He was obviously charismatic. Yeah. I mean, he managed to persuade people to come and join the cause and all of that, and he did that he managed to lead the army, and he obviously had something about him. Yeah. However, I mean, you could argue about how competent he was as a commander, certainly, but he obviously had some charisma. We've actually got Nosas, which is kind of... We're now, the Rosemarkie Caves Group is a separate organisation, but we originally started as a Nosas project, North of Scotland Archaeological Society. It's our 25th anniversary coming up, and we've got Tony Pollard, who's kind of probably the most well-known expert on the archaeology of Culloden battle site, coming up and talking. So,
that would be fascinating. I follow a channel on YouTube. It's called Scottish History Tours, and the fellow who does that, he's very, very well read. He did a video on Culloden that was just such an eye-opener to me, because he painted the picture of it being a battle about European politics.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yes. And it wasn't just Scotland versus England. There was all kinds of...
They wanted the English were fighting the French, and the English wanted the French to the Scots to help the Scots, so they invaded. So it was all
very complex.
It was meant to be coordinated. The French never turned up.
But it's Hanoverians and Jacobites. No. There were more Scots on the Hanoverian side of Culloden.
Right, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, there were. It's true.
Go to Culloden Visitor Centre, and they've got a corridor where it's Jacobite story on one side and a Hanoverian story on the other.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people just they just think it was just a kind of a local clans fighting for their independence, but there was I know even Italian influence as well. I think wasn't there was Prince Charlie was
he was
kind
born
of
in Rome,
backed, but he was looking for the backing of the Pope.
There wasn't Italy then, though. It was separate states.
Certainly there was French, there was some French, there was Irish, and as I say, the French backing was meant to be very important, but it never really materialised.
The French were fighting the English, and the French thought that if they supported the Scots, the English would have to come back from them fighting them to fight the Scots. So that was the triangle.
But don't forget, it's kicked off by James II, who is the Stuart king. James VII and II being kicked out and being replaced by William and Mary, which is really billed as a, well, I don't know how it's billed, but it's really an invasion by the Dutch.
No, it was an invasion, but it was
and the Jacobites are the people who are wanting the restoration of James VII and his successors, and that's it. It's not really Scottish English.
Bonnie Prince Charlie is his grandson.
Yeah, and then there are elements of Catholic Protestant.
Well, there is Catholic. I mean, I think probably one of the big reasons James the Seventh was kicked out or forced to leave was because he was a Catholic and openly a Catholic.
No, he was the first. Are we talking James I of England? James II of England.
So James I took over. James I of England took over after Elizabeth I died in 1603, and he became the first king of England and Scotland. And thereafter, all the kings were kings of both countries. And so then you had Charles I, his son, who was executed. Then there was a civil war. Then Charles II, his son, came back. Who was a Protestant, and then his brother is James II, the one we're talking about. He was a Catholic, which at that point was incredibly unpopular, and for that reason, that's one of the big reasons.
And the trigger for it is James II has a male heir is born, so this produces a prospect of a string of Catholic kings.
I see.
And that is the old pretender.
Yeah.
James III, James VIII. Yeah. And Bonnie Prince Charlie is his son.
Yeah. That's right. So we're talking, 50 odd years after the Glorious Revolution by the time the 45 happened.
Anyway, I'm going to bring us back here. So I just wanted to, because we've gone over Rosemarkie Man, but I just wanted to touch on the other discoveries that you have made. Other groups of people that had been working these caves. What have you found?
After 100 years after Rosemarkie Man was laid to rest, there was ironworking in the cave, and we found charcoal and so on related to that. And in another cave, we found part of a furnace. Mm-hmm. Then you skip forward. At some stage, this wall was built across, so it provided maybe better shelter. We do know that travelling people were using the caves, and I found a death register entry at Inverness Archive Centre of somebody whose wife had died in the cave of what turns out to be TB. And following on from that, it was a request that she be buried in a pauper's grave. In other words, that the parish paid for her burial. So obviously very, very poor people. We found remnants of their lifestyle. We found broken glass. We found shoes.
Yes, shoes.
Shoes. Whether they were repairing shoes or
cobblers.
Yes. Whether they were using old shoes to make new shoes or what, but there was an awful lot of shoe leather.
Well, that gives you a clue. So you think they were maybe running a shoe shop, kind of like the locals maybe could have come down here to buy shoes, or would they repair or make shoes and bring them back to sell, or
That's it.
Possibly.
We
don't know.
don't know.
Whether
was there
they-
any coins or any anything
No.
exchanged that was found?
No,
I'm not sure. Was there any coins?
There is rumour that not when we were digging, but earlier, a Roman coin had been found in one of the caves, but nobody's been able to trace it.
Was that in Cairds?
That was Cairds.
Yeah.
The other thing we found, and if anyone can come up with an answer, we would be delighted. We found herring scales, fish scales, a complete mat of them, which was 4 inches thick.
Something like that. At least the big chunks of it.
Big chunks of them. Why were they keeping herring scales? What possible use could a raft of herring scales be?
Would they be? Can you date that?
We know from dating either side of it that it's probably post-medieval, i.e. it's probably 200, 300, 400 years ago, that kind of period. But we don't. We're actually waiting for some more dates at the moment, which might.
But you think? I mean, is it possible that it was like a little miniature fish factory, and they were just scaling them and just leaving the scales?
That would be my thought. I think quite possibly it's a time when the cave wasn't being lived in, habited, before the travelling folk came, and it was at that point just being used kind of almost as a kind of industrial fish processing place.
But why? But there was nothing else of the herring, just the scales, and there is just this huge quantity of them. And why weren't they? They must have stunk, but then probably the whole thing did anyway. But they would have got rid of them into the sea.
Would they be using it as bait for lobsters or anything else like that? Or
Limpets were your fish bait.
Yeah. We don't know, but there was massive amounts of it. And below that, I was telling you earlier, we found this articulated remains of a poleaxed horse. It was the skull and the spine still all joined together, which Bob, I think, excavated. And that was later dated to around about 1600 AD, so around about 400 years ago. But obviously, and we also found lots of other big chunks of animal there, big butchered bones, articulated parts of cows and stuff, all in that kind of layer. And this was after the Pictish period. So in one of the caves through the buttress, we've got a whole Pictish area of activity where there was lots of burning going on, lots of charcoal, lots of fires, lots of burnt bone, lots of possibly iron working related activity. Then there was a whole load of stones placed on top of that at some point. Yes. We don't know why, but a big thick layer of stones. We had to shift them all, we know about it, and presumably deliberately placed there. And then on top of that, we get, or right at the top of that, we get some of this bone and the horse. And then on top of that, we've got all this herring scale. And then on top of that, we got all the tinker stuff.
The cave was well used.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, utilised by people for a long, long time. And actually, we're down here today, and we've discovered that there's a fresh fire in the cave. That someone's even to this day they've been using the cave. They've camped. Unfortunately, they've destroyed these little walls here, which is a sin.
I mean, that's really disappointing. This is a well-made mortared wall, which someone's actually taken apart to use to heat up on their fire or something, one of the stones. And this wall's probably been here for 500 years, maybe. And we excavated this, so yeah, it's just sad. It seems really unnecessary. Why would anyone want to do that? There's enough stones around, right, to put on your fire without destroying a wall to do it.
Well, we're gonna run out of battery very soon, so I'm gonna conclude the last few questions. So, what advice would you give to anybody who would want to get involved in archaeology and digs around Scotland?
Do it.
Yeah.
join a local organisation.
Okay, how can they do that?
Minded people. Well, the first thing would be an internet search and find one. Certainly in this part of the world, there's our group, Rosemarkie Caves Project. There's the North of Scotland Archaeological Society we're members of. There are groups in Assynt, there are groups in Caithness, there's a group in Brora. So there are lots of people around who do a mixture of talks, excavations, walks around, and there's plenty of advice available, and everybody's welcome, and everybody can make a good contribution. You don't need to be an expert.
The other thing I would say is every year there are community excavations where anyone can volunteer. And I think a lot of people don't realise that. I remember when I first got into it, there was somebody telling me, oh, if you're just an ordinary person, you don't get the chance to go on a dig. But actually, that isn't true. There are lots of these community excavations out there where you can volunteer and you can go along and you can learn skills. And that's how I started. I saw an advert on the Tor fruit farm for a local dig, and I went along and fell in love with it. So I would advise people to do that.
Yeah. You don't need any experience, you don't need any qualifications. People will teach you as you go along, and you'll learn a lot very quickly.
Do you ever tie in with like local schools or anything like that? Yeah. You do? And you get pupils coming along and joining digs?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. These community digs almost always have school visits involved. Yeah, so it's a very common part of it, yeah.
Right, my last question, I like to ask everyone at the end of the podcast, and I actually think I know the answer that you're all going to give, but I'll let you answer anyway. If you were me and you were conducting a podcast and you could speak to anybody, dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh, it's got to be Rosemarkie, hasn't it?
I thought you were going to say.
Yeah, I think so, with a translator.
Yes.
Yeah.
With a translator. Yeah. What an insight it would be to speak to.
It would be
I'd
amazing.
just like somebody to be able to tell me more about his life, and only he can do that, but also to explain the wonderful Pictish stones.
No, yeah, what do they mean?
Well, you guys are going to keep digging and finding more, and the clues will keep coming, I'm sure.
We're still waiting for some dates back about the Rosemarkie Caves project. So it'll be a couple of years before we're published.
We also think there may be a popular book at some point. So not just an academic publication, but also like a colour paperback thing.
Excellent.
And at some point, a museum will get the assemblage, including our man. So, and we, obviously we will want him to be properly displayed, or for there to be a proper display at least, So whether that's Grome House or whether it's Inverness or, at some point that will happen.
Well, James, Rosemary, Bob, it's been such an amazing insight. And speaking to experts, I feel very fortunate to be down here, and thank you for coming down and meeting me and telling me all about the caves. And I really hope on the next big find I get to talk to you all again. Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.